The cold bit into Juliet Nash's skin like 1,000 tiny knives, and she knew with absolute certainty that her stepfather was not coming back for her. She had been sitting in the back of the wagon for what felt like hours, watching the snow fall harder and faster, watching the sky darken from gray to charcoal to something approaching black. The mountains around her seemed to close in, towering walls of rock and pine that offered no comfort, no shelter, only the promise of a slow death in the gathering storm. Her stepfather Marcus had told her to wait, told her he was going to scout ahead for a better path through the mountain pass. That had been when the sun still held a pale position in the sky. Now there was nothing but swirling white and the howl of wind through the trees. She was 19 years old, and she was going to die out here because a man who had never wanted her in the first place had finally found his excuse to be rid of her. The wagon offered little protection. The canvas cover had torn weeks ago on the trail from Missouri to Arkansas, and Marcus had never bothered to repair it properly. Their supplies were meager, meant to last only until they reached Eureka Springs, where he claimed he had work waiting. Juliet had her doubts about that, just as she had doubts about everything that came out of his mouth, but she had no choice but to follow. Her mother had died 6 months ago, taken by fever, and Marcus had made it clear that Juliet was now his burden to bear until he could marry her off to the first man who would take her. She pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders and tried to stop her teeth from chattering. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind seemed to find every gap in her clothing. Her fingers were already numb, her toes aching in her worn leather boots. She knew she should try to build a fire, but the wood they had was soaked through, and even if she could get it lit, the wind would snuff it out in moments. The horse whinnied nervously, stamping its feet in the deepening snow. At least Marcus had left her the horse, though she suspected that was more oversight than kindness. The animal was old and half lame, barely able to pull the wagon on good days. She reached out to stroke its neck, trying to offer comfort even as she received none herself. "It is all right," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "We will be all right." But she did not believe it. She did not believe it at all. The first day passed in a blur of cold and fear. Juliet tried to stay awake, tried to keep moving to maintain what little warmth she could generate, but exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy blanket. She dozed in fits and starts, waking each time with a jolt of terror that the snow had covered her completely, that she had already slipped into the final sleep. The horse stood with its head down, its breath coming in great plumes of steam. She fed it the last of the oats, knowing it needed the strength more than she needed whatever small comfort the food might bring her. By the second day, she could no longer feel her feet. The snow had piled up around the wagon, drifting against the wheels until she wondered if she could move it, even if she tried. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her throat raw from breathing the frigid air. She had tried to eat some of the hardtack in their supplies, but her jaw would not work properly, her teeth chattering too hard to chew. She managed to suck on a piece until it softened enough to swallow, but it sat in her stomach like a stone. She thought about her mother, about the way she had looked in those final days, her face gaunt and fever bright. Juliet had held her hand and promised to be strong, to survive, to find a good life somewhere beyond the poverty and hardship they had known. Her mother had squeezed her fingers with what little strength remained and told her that she was proud of her, that she loved her, that she would always watch over her. "I'm sorry, Mama," Juliet whispered into the howling wind. "I tried." The second night was the worst. The temperature plummeted so low that she could not stop shaking, her whole body convulsing with shivers that made her bones ache. She climbed into the wagon bed and buried herself under every blanket and scrap of cloth she could find, but it was not enough. The cold seeped through everything, stealing what little warmth she had left. She pressed herself against the horse's flank, hoping the animal's body heat would help, but the poor creature was suffering just as much as she was. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind playing tricks on her. She saw her mother standing in the snow, beckoning to her. She saw the house in Missouri where she had grown up, smoke curling from the chimney, warm and inviting. She heard voices calling her name, but when she tried to answer, no sound came out. By the third day, she was no longer shivering. That should have been a relief, but some dim part of her mind recognized it for what it was, the final stage before death. Her body had given up trying to warm itself. She lay in the wagon bed, staring up at the gray sky, watching the snow fall in lazy spirals. It was almost beautiful, she thought. almost peaceful. She did not hear the horse approaching, did not hear the man's voice calling out, did not realize she was no longer alone until a face appeared above her, weathered and concerned, with eyes the color of a summer sky. "Madam? Madam, can you hear me?" She tried to focus on the face, but it kept blurring and shifting. She thought maybe she was hallucinating again, another cruel trick of her dying mind. "She is alive!" the voice called to someone else. "Barely, but she is alive! Get the blankets, quick!" Hands were lifting her, wrapping her in warmth, and she wanted to protest, wanted to say that she was fine, that she just needed to rest a little longer, but her tongue would not work. She felt herself being lifted onto a horse, felt a solid warmth at her back as someone settled behind her. "Hold on," the voice said, close to her ear now. "Just hold on, I've got you." And then there was movement, the steady rhythm of a horse's gait, and she let herself drift away into the darkness. When Juliet woke, she was warm. That was the first thing she registered, the almost painful sensation of warmth against her frozen skin. The second thing was the crackling of a fire nearby, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt crusted shut. She tried to move, but her body would not respond. "Easy now," a voice said, and she felt a cool cloth against her face, gently wiping away the ice and grime. "Do not try to move too fast. You have been out for a while." Her eyes finally opened, and she found herself staring up at rough wooden beams. She was lying on something soft, covered in what felt like a mountain of blankets. The warmth was coming from a fire burning in a stone hearth nearby, the flames dancing and leaping. "Where am I?" she managed to croak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "My cabin," the voice answered, and the face from before appeared in her line of vision. Now that her eyes were working properly, she could see him more clearly. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were indeed blue, startlingly so, and they held a kindness that made her chest ache. "My name is Ryder Finch. I found you in the mountains, 3 days north of here. What in God's name were you doing out there?" 3 days north. The words echoed in her mind. If he had found her 3 days north, then Marcus must have left her miles from their destination, had left her in the worst possible place, in the middle of a mountain pass with a storm coming in. "My stepfather," she said, and was horrified to feel tears sliding down her cheeks. "He said he was scouting ahead. He never came back." Ryder's expression darkened. "He left you there? Alone?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "How long were you there?" 3 days, I think. Maybe longer. I lost track." He muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse, then shook his head. "You are lucky to be alive, madam. Another few hours and you would not have been. As it is, we have got to worry about frostbite. Let me see your hands." He pulled her hands from under the blankets, and she saw with detached horror that her fingers were swollen and discolored, the skin a mottled purple and white. Her feet, when he carefully examined them, looked even worse. "This is not good," he said quietly, "but I have seen worse. We will have to warm them up slowly, very slowly. It is going to hurt." "I cannot feel them," she admitted. "You will." He stood and moved to the fire, ladling something from a pot that hung over the flames. "First, we need to get something warm into you. Can you sit up?" With his help, she managed to prop herself up against the pillows. He handed her a cup of broth, and she wrapped her useless hands around it, grateful for the warmth even if she could not feel it. He had to help her drink, tipping the cup carefully to her lips. The broth was rich and savory, thick with meat and vegetables, and she felt it spreading warmth through her chest and belly. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need to thank me," he said. "Any decent person would have done the same." But she knew that was not true. Marcus had left her to die. He had made a choice, and it had not been a decent one. Over the next several hours, Ryder worked tirelessly to warm her extremities. He prepared basins of lukewarm water and gently immersed her hands and feet, gradually increasing the temperature. He had been right about the pain. As feeling began to return, it felt like her fingers and toes were being stabbed with hot needles. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, but he must have seen the agony in her face. "I know it hurts," he said gently, "but the pain means there is still blood flowing, still life in those tissues. That's a good thing." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He made her more broth and later some weak tea with honey. He changed the blankets around her when she began to sweat as her core temperature normalized. He never once made her feel like a burden, never once suggested that rescuing her had been an inconvenience. He simply worked, his hands steady and sure, his presence calm and reassuring. "Where were you headed?" he asked at one point, as he was rewrapping her feet in clean, dry cloths. "Eureka Springs," she said. "My stepfather said he had worked there. I do not know if that was true." "It is a good town," Ryder said. "Growing fast. Lots of folks coming through for the springs. They say the water has healing properties." "Where did you come from?" "Missouri. A small farm outside of Independence. My mother died 6 months ago, and Marcus decided we should head west. I think he just wanted to get away from the memories. And away from the responsibility of a stepdaughter," Ryder said quietly. She did not deny it. It was the truth, after all. "Do you have any other family?" he asked. She shook her head. "My father died when I was young. My mother remarried Marcus 5 years ago. I have an aunt somewhere back east, but we lost touch years ago. There is no one." She saw something flicker in his eyes, some emotion she could not quite name. Sympathy, perhaps, or understanding, or maybe just sadness for her situation. "Well," he said finally, "you are not alone now. You are here, and you are safe, and that is what matters." The days that followed were a strange mixture of pain and peace. The pain came from her slowly healing hands and feet, the burning and tingling as circulation returned fully. Ryder was cautiously optimistic that she would not lose any digits, though he warned her that the skin might peel and blister for a while. The peace came from the cabin itself, from the rhythm of the days, from Ryder's quiet presence. She learned that he was a rancher, or trying to be. He had a small spread about 10 miles from Eureka Springs, where he was raising cattle and horses. The cabin where she was staying was actually his line shack, a shelter he used when he was working the far edges of his property. He had been up here checking on some stray cattle when the storm hit, and had decided to wait it out rather than risk the ride back. That was when he had seen the wagon, half buried in snow, and gone to investigate. "I thought maybe someone had abandoned it," he admitted. "People do that sometimes when the going gets tough. I was not expecting to find anyone inside." "I am glad you looked," she said softly. He smiled at that, a slow, warm smile that made her heart do a strange little flip in her chest. "So am I." As her strength returned, she began to help around the cabin as much as she could. Her hands were still clumsy, her fingers still painful, but she could manage simple tasks. She tended the fire, washed the dishes, helped prepare meals. Ryder protested at first, insisting that she should rest, but she could see the relief in his eyes when she took on some of the work. He had been doing everything himself for days, and he was exhausted. They fell into an easy companionship. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. He told her about his life, about growing up in Texas, about coming to Arkansas 5 years ago to make his own way. He spoke of his parents who had died in a cholera outbreak, of his younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Dallas. He talked about his dreams for the ranch, about building a herd that would be the envy of the territory. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's gentle nature, and her father's booming laugh. She told him about learning to read from an old school teacher who had boarded with them one winter, about helping her mother with the sewing and cooking. She did not talk much about Marcus. There was not much to say about him that was worth saying. "What will you do?" Ryder asked one evening, about a week after he had found her. "When you are well enough, I mean. Will you go on to Eureka Springs?" She had been thinking about that question herself. "I suppose I should. I have nowhere else to go." "You could stay," he said quietly, not looking at her. "I mean, not here in the line shack, but there are people in Eureka Springs who might hire you. There's a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson. She's always looking for help. I could introduce you." "That is kind of you," she said, and meant it. But even as she said it, she felt a pang at the thought of leaving, which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. She had no reason to feel attached to him, no reason to feel like leaving would be losing something precious, except that she did feel that way. And from the way he was staring into the fire, his jaw tight, She thought maybe he felt it too. The snow finally stopped after 10 days, and the sun emerged, bright and blinding against the white landscape. Ryder announced that they would head down to the main ranch the next day, and then on to Eureka Springs. Juliet felt her stomach twist with a mixture of anticipation and dread. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Ryder's breathing from his bedroll by the fire. He had insisted she take the bed, had slept on the floor every night without complaint. She thought about how he had saved her life, about how gentle he had been during her recovery, about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She thought about how safe she felt here, how the cabin had become more of a home in these few days than anywhere she had lived since her mother died. She heard him shift, heard the soft rustle of blankets. "Juliet? You awake?" "Yes," she whispered. There was a long pause. Then, "Are you afraid? About going to town?" She considered lying, but she was tired of lies. "Yes." Another pause. "You do not have to be afraid. I will help you. I will make sure you are settled somewhere safe." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." She heard him sit up, saw his silhouette against the dying fire. "I know what it is like to be alone," he said softly. "I know what it is like to have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. When my parents died, I was 19, same as you. I had my sister, but she was younger, and I had to be strong for her. There were days I did not think I could do it, days I thought about just giving up. But someone helped us. An old rancher named Tom Fletcher gave me a job, taught me everything he knew. He did not have to do that. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. I guess I am just trying to do the same." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. "I'm glad you found me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "So am I," he replied. "So am I." The ranch was beautiful. Juliet caught her first glimpse of it as they crested a hill in the late afternoon, the sun painting the snow-covered fields gold. The main house was a solid structure of logs and stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly. There were several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle dotting the landscape. "This is yours?" she asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Ryder smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. "Every acre. It is not much yet, but it will be. Another few years and I will have one of the best herds in the territory." As they approached the house, a dog came bounding out, barking joyfully. It was a large brown and white mutt, all wagging tail and lolling tongue. It danced around Ryder's horse, clearly delighted at his return. "This is Scout," Ryder said, dismounting. "He is supposed to be a cattle dog, but mostly he just eats and sleeps and begs for scraps." Juliet laughed, the sound surprising her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. Ryder helped her down from her horse, his hands gentle on her waist, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest again. The inside of the house was just as impressive as the outside. It was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 smaller bedrooms, and a loft above. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, the floors covered with woven rag rugs. A large fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a painting of a Texas landscape, all rolling hills and big sky. "My mother painted that," Ryder said, noticing her looking at it. "It was her view from our house when I was growing up." "It is beautiful," Juliet said softly. He showed her the spare bedroom, which was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the fields. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Rest up. Tomorrow we will go into town and I will introduce you to Mrs. Patterson." But that night, over a dinner of venison stew and fresh bread that Ryder somehow managed to produce, Juliet found herself not wanting to think about tomorrow. Instead, she asked him about the ranch, about his plans, about the cattle and horses. He talked animatedly, his whole face lighting up, and she found herself leaning forward, hanging on every word. "You really love this," she said at one point. "I do," he admitted. "It is hard work, but it is mine, you know. Every fence post, every acre, every head of cattle. I built this with my own 2 hands. No one can take it away from me." She understood that. The need for something that belonged to you, something that could not be stolen or lost or destroyed. She had never had that. Even the clothes on her back were ones her mother had made, repurposed from older garments. She owned nothing, had nothing that was truly hers. "I envy you," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "You could have that too, you know? Something that is yours. It might take time, but you could build a life here. A good life." "I would not even know where to start," she admitted. "You start by surviving," he said, "which you have already done. The rest will come." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there could be more to her life than just scraping by, just enduring. Wanted to believe that she could have something good, something lasting. That night, lying in the soft bed in the spare room, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the future. She thought about working at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, saving her wages, maybe one day having a little place of her own. It was a nice dream, a safe dream, but it was not the dream that made her heart race. That dream involved staying here, on this ranch, with the blue-eyed cowboy who had saved her life. That dream involved building something together, creating a life side by side. That dream was dangerous and foolish, and entirely too much to hope for. But she could not stop herself from hoping anyway. The ride into Eureka Springs the next morning was beautiful. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and the sun glinted off the snow like diamonds. The town itself was nestled in a valley, surrounded by the Ozark Mountains, and even from a distance, Juliet could see that it was thriving. There were dozens of buildings, some brick, some wood, all clustered around what appeared to be a main street. She could see people moving about, wagons and horses, the bustle of commerce and life. "It has grown a lot in the past few years," Ryder explained as they descended toward the town. "The springs bring in people from all over, folks hoping to cure their ailments. And where there are people, there is business. Lots of opportunity here for those willing to work." He led her down the main street, pointing out various establishments. The general store, the blacksmith, the doctor's office, the saloon. And there, at the end of the street, was a large two-story house with a sign that read, "Patterson's Boarding House." Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a formidable woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp dark eyes that seemed to see everything. But her smile, when Ryder introduced Juliet, was warm and genuine. "So you are the girl Ryder found half frozen in the mountains," she said, looking Juliet up and down. "You look better than I expected, given what he told me." "Ryder took very good care of me," Juliet said, glancing at him. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I am sure he did," Mrs. Patterson said, a knowing glint in her eye. "Now he says you are looking for work. Can you cook?" "Yes, madam." "Clean?" "Yes, madam." "Handle guests, even when they are ornery and difficult?" Juliet thought about Marcus, about dealing with his moods and demands for 5 years. "Yes, madam." Mrs. Patterson nodded, satisfied. "Then I can use you. I will provide room and board, plus $2 a week. You will help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatever else needs doing. Sundays are your own time. Does that sound fair?" $2 a week. It was not much, but it was more than Juliet had ever earned in her life. "That sounds very fair, thank you." "Good. You can start tomorrow. Ryder, will you bring her by in the morning?" "Actually," Ryder said slowly, "I was thinking she could stay at the ranch for a few more days, make sure she is fully recovered before she starts working, if that's all right with you." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "Is that what you were thinking?" "Yes, madam." She looked between them, and Juliet had the distinct impression that the woman was seeing far more than either of them wanted to reveal. "All right," she said finally, "but I will expect her bright and early Monday morning. And Ryder Finch, you make sure this girl's reputation stays intact, you hear me?" Ryder's ears turned red. "Yes, madam, of course." As they walked back to their horses, Juliet could not help but smile. "She is a bit intimidating." "She's a good woman," Ryder said, "tough but fair. You will like working for her, I think." "Why did you ask if I could stay a few more days?" The question came out more softly than she intended, almost shy. He did not look at her, busying himself with adjusting his horse's saddle. "I just thought you might need more time to rest. It is hard work at the boarding house. You should be at full strength." It was a reasonable explanation, a logical explanation. But Juliet did not think it was the real reason, and from the way he was still not meeting her eyes, she did not think he believed it either. They spent those extra days working around the ranch. Ryder showed her how to feed the chickens, how to collect eggs, how to milk the cow he kept for his own use. He taught her to ride properly, not just perched behind him on his horse, but on her own mount, a gentle mare named Daisy. Juliet took to it quickly, loving the feeling of freedom it gave her, the sense of control. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that his favorite color was the blue of the sky just after dawn, that he had a sweet tooth and would eat an entire pie in one sitting if she let him, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a bull that had gotten aggressive during branding, that he sang when he worked, old cowboy songs that his father had taught him, though he claimed he could not carry a tune to save his life. She told him about her love of books, even though she had only ever owned 2. About how she used to make up stories in her head when she was doing chores, grand adventures and romances, about how she had always wanted to see the ocean, though she had no idea if she ever would, about how she missed her mother every single day, a constant ache in her chest that never quite went away. "I think she would be proud of you," Ryder said one night, "for surviving, for being strong." "I do not feel strong," Juliet admitted. "I feel lost." "Being lost and being weak are not the same thing," he said. "You will find your way." "What if I do not want to?" The words came out before she could stop them, and she immediately wished she could take them back. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw her own confusion and longing reflected in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said carefully, "what if I have already found where I want to be?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken feelings. Ryder opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Juliet, But before he could finish, Scout started barking frantically outside, and they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Ryder was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle by the door. "Stay inside," he said, his voice hard, but Juliet followed him to the window, peering out into the darkness. A man on horseback was approaching the house, and even in the dim light from the porch lantern, she recognized him. Marcus. Her stepfather looked worse for wear. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face gaunt and haggard. His horse was limping, clearly in poor condition. He pulled up in front of the house and dismounted stiffly. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone home? I need help." Ryder stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "State your business." Marcus squinted up at him. "I'm looking for my stepdaughter. She went missing in a storm up in the mountains about 2 weeks back. I have been searching for her. Have you seen a young woman, dark hair, about this tall?" The audacity of the lie took Juliet's breath away. He was claiming he had been searching for her, when he had been the one to abandon her. Ryder's voice was cold. "Is that so? You have been searching for her?" "Yes, sir. I am beside myself with worry. She's all I have left of my dear departed wife." Juliet could not stand it anymore. She pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. "Hello, Marcus." Her stepfather's face went through a series of expressions, shock, fear, and then anger. "Juliet, thank God you are alive. I've been looking everywhere for you." "No, you have not," she said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "You left me to die in that storm. You told me to wait, and you never came back." "That is not true. I got turned around in the snow. By the time I found my way back, you and the wagon were gone." "Gone?" "I sat in that wagon for 3 days, exactly where you left me." "You must be confused. The cold, it can play tricks on the mind." Ryder stepped forward, putting himself between Marcus and Juliet. "I think you should leave." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Now wait just a minute. That is my stepdaughter. I have a right to take her with me." "She is 19 years old," Ryder said. "A grown woman. She can make her own choices, and I do not think she wants to go with you." "Is that true, Juliet?" Marcus's voice took on a wheedling tone. "You would believe this stranger over me? I am your family." "You are not my family," Juliet said, and saying the words out loud felt like breaking chains. "You never were. You married my mother for her property, and when she died, you tried to get rid of me. Well, you succeeded. I am rid of you now." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little witch, after everything I have done for you." "You have done nothing for me but make my life miserable," Juliet shot back, "and I am done. Leave. Now." For a moment, she thought he might try to grab her, might try to force her onto his horse, but then he saw Ryder's rifle, saw the cold determination in the cowboy's eyes, and he apparently thought better of it. "Fine," he spat. "Keep her. See how long it is before she becomes a burden to you, too." He mounted his horse, jerking roughly on the reins. The poor animal stumbled, and Juliet felt a pang of pity for it. Marcus rode off into the darkness, and they watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded away. Juliet realized she was shaking. The confrontation had taken more out of her than she had realized. Ryder set the rifle aside and turned to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," she said honestly. "I thought I would feel triumphant or relieved, but I just feel sad." "That is normal," he said. "You spent years under his roof. Even if he was a terrible person, cutting those ties is not easy." "He really did try to kill me," she said, the reality of it hitting her all over again. "If you had not found me—" "But I did find you," Ryder said firmly, "and you are safe now. He cannot hurt you anymore." She looked up at him, at his strong, kind face, and felt something break open inside her. All the fear and pain and loneliness of the past months seemed to overflow, and before she knew it, she was crying, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Ryder pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, one hand stroking her hair. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are safe. I have got you." And somehow, hearing those words, feeling his solid warmth around her, she believed him. They stood like that for a long time, until her tears finally subsided. When she pulled back, she was embarrassed, her face hot. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have nothing to apologize for," he said. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Juliet Nash. You survived something that would have killed most people. You are allowed to cry." She managed a watery smile. "Thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For taking care of me. For standing up to Marcus. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," he said, but his hands were still on her arms, and he was looking at her in a way that made her heart race. "Ryder," she said softly. "Earlier, before Marcus came, I said something about having found where I want to be. I remember. Did you understand what I meant?" He was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "I think so, but I want to make sure. What did you mean, Juliet?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I meant that I do not want to go work at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. I mean, I will if I have to, but what I really want is to stay here. With you." His hands tightened on her arms. "Juliet, I do not want you to feel obligated. I know I saved your life, but that does not mean you owe me anything. I would never ask you to stay out of some sense of debt." "That is not why I want to stay," she said. "I want to stay because when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found home. I want to stay because you make me laugh and you make me feel safe, and you look at me like I am something precious. I want to stay because I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then Ryder was cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tear tracks on her cheeks, and he was smiling. "I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you in that wagon," he said, half frozen and barely conscious, "and I looked at you and thought she is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And then I got to know you, got to see how strong and kind and smart you are, and I fell even harder. I was terrified to let you go to that boarding house, terrified that once you were gone I would never see you again." "Then do not let me go," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and gentle, his lips warm against hers. It was Juliet's first kiss, and it was everything she had ever imagined and more. When he pulled back, they were both breathless. "Stay with me," he said, "not as a guest or a hired hand. Stay as my wife. Marry me, Juliet." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married a week later in the small church in Eureka Springs. Mrs. Patterson served as witness, along with the town minister's wife. It was a simple ceremony, no fancy dress or elaborate decorations, but Juliet had never felt more beautiful. She wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had loaned her, a lovely blue that matched Ryder's eyes, and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers. When Ryder slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, she felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this wonderful, kind man, had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Juliet threw herself into learning everything she could about running a ranch. She learned to tend the animals, to preserve food, to mend harnesses and repair fences. Ryder was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, and he seemed to delight in her progress. They worked side by side during the day, and at night they lay in each other's arms, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want a big family," Ryder admitted one night. 4 or 5 children running around, making noise and getting into trouble. "That does sound wonderful," Juliet said, snuggling closer. "Though I think we should start with one and see how we do." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Fair enough." Spring came, and with it, new life. The cattle dropped their calves, and Juliet helped Ryder with the branding and tagging. It was hard, dirty work, but she loved it. She loved seeing the results of their labor, loved watching the herd grow. She learned to ride out to check on the cattle, learned to spot signs of illness or injury, learned to work a rope well enough to help move stubborn animals. The neighbors began to stop by, curious about Ryder's new wife. They were welcomed warmly, and soon Juliet found herself part of a community. There was the Johnson family from the adjoining ranch, with their 5 boisterous children. There was old Tom Fletcher, the man who had helped Ryder get his start, who became a frequent visitor and unofficial grandfather figure. There was young Clara Davis, a girl about Juliet's age who lived in town and who quickly became a close friend. In late summer, Juliet realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the stress of the hard work, but when another month passed with no sign, she began to suspect the truth. She was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening as they were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He had been quiet all day, worried about a section of fence that had broken during a storm, but when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly, all his worries seemed to melt away. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I think so." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy? Juliet, I'm over the moon. I cannot wait to meet this little one." They rode into town the next day to see Dr. Miller, who confirmed what Juliet already knew. She was about 2 months along, and if all went well, they would have a baby in early spring. Ryder insisted on buying her a peppermint stick from the general store to celebrate, even though she protested that he was being silly. The pregnancy was not easy. Juliet suffered from terrible nausea in the first few months, and there were days when she could barely keep down water, let alone food. Ryder hovered over her like a worried hen, making her rest when she wanted to work, bringing her weak tea and dry toast. Mrs. Patterson came out to visit and brought a ginger remedy that helped settle her stomach. As she grew larger, the work became more difficult. She could no longer ride out with Ryder to check the cattle, could no longer help with the heavy lifting. She fretted about being useless, but Ryder would hear none of it. "You're growing our child," he told her firmly. "That is the most important job there is. Everything else can wait." In late February, the pain started. It was the middle of the night, and Juliet woke Ryder in a panic. He dressed quickly and rode for town to fetch Dr. Miller and Mrs. Patterson, leaving Juliet in the care of Sarah Johnson, who had come to stay with them for the last few weeks. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the next evening. There were moments when Juliet was certain she could not do it, could not endure another contraction, but Sarah and Mrs. Patterson coached her through each one. And when Ryder was finally allowed back into the room, he held her hand and whispered encouragement, his eyes red-rimmed from worry and lack of sleep. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, perfect in every way. Dr. Miller placed him in Juliet's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, furious face and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is beautiful," Ryder said, his voice choked with tears. "He is perfect." They named him William, after Ryder's father. Little Will had his father's blue eyes and a surprising amount of dark hair. He was a good baby, rarely fussing, and he seemed to love being carried around the ranch, watching everything with wide, curious eyes. Life settled into a new rhythm. Juliet's days were filled with feeding and changing and rocking, while Ryder worked the ranch with renewed determination. He hired a young man named Sam to help with the work so he could spend more time with his family. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, Will sleeping in Juliet's arms, and talk about the future. "I want to expand the herd," Ryder said one night. "Maybe buy the Miller place if it comes up for sale. It borders our property on the west side." "That would be wonderful," Juliet said. "We would have room for twice as many cattle." "And more children," Ryder added with a grin. "Let us get through this one first," Juliet laughed. But she liked the idea. She liked the thought of more children, of a house full of love and laughter. The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. When Will was 2, they had a second son, whom they named Henry, after the minister who had married them. 2 years after that came a daughter, sweet little Emma, with her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. The house rang with the sound of children's laughter, and Juliet often paused in her work to marvel at how far she had come from that frozen, desperate girl in the wagon. The ranch prospered too. Ryder's herd grew until it was one of the largest in the area. They did buy the Miller place when old Mr. Miller decided to retire to live with his daughter, and the expanded property allowed them to run even more cattle. They hired more hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse and looked up to Ryder like he was some kind of hero. One day, when Juliet was in town buying supplies, she ran into Clara Davis, now Clara Henderson, after marrying a local carpenter. Clara was expecting her first child, and the two women spent a pleasant hour catching up over tea at the hotel restaurant. "You look happy," Clara said, smiling at her friend. "Truly happy." "I am," Juliet said, and meant it. "I never thought I could be this happy." "You deserve it," Clara said firmly. "After what you went through, after what that horrible stepfather did to you, you deserve every bit of joy you have found." Juliet rarely thought about Marcus anymore. She had heard years ago that he had died in a saloon brawl somewhere in Missouri. She had felt nothing at the news, no sadness, no anger, just a sort of distant relief that he could never hurt anyone else. He was part of a past that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. On their 10th anniversary, Ryder surprised Juliet with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where a beautiful black horse stood waiting. The animal was young and spirited, with intelligent eyes and a glossy coat. "She is yours," Ryder said. "I know Daisy has been slowing down, and I thought you might like a new mount, something that can keep up with you." Juliet walked up to the horse, letting it sniff her hand before stroking its neck. "She is beautiful. What is her name?" "That is up to you. She is your horse." Juliet thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope. Her name is Hope." "That is perfect," Ryder said, coming to stand beside her. "You know, 10 years ago I found you in that storm. I keep thinking about how different my life would be if I had not gone to check on those cattle that day. If I had decided to stay at the main ranch instead of riding up to the line shack." "I think about that too," Juliet admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying, how easily I could have just been another story of someone lost in the mountains. And then you found me." "I will always be grateful that I did," Ryder said. "You gave me everything, Juliet. A family, a home, a reason to work hard and build something lasting. You made my life complete." She turned to him, reaching up to touch his face. There were lines there now that had not been there 10 years ago, a few threads of silver in his hair, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "You saved my life, and then you gave me a life worth living. I love you so much." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and in that moment, Juliet felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The children grew. Will became tall and serious, with a natural talent for working with horses. At 15, he could break a green colt better than most men twice his age. Henry was quieter, more contemplative, and showed an interest in books and learning that delighted Juliet. Emma was a perfect blend of both parents, with her father's determination and her mother's kindness. When Will turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go to Texas to learn about the big cattle drives. It was 1891, and the era of the great drives was waning, but there were still outfits that moved herds north to the railheads. Ryder was reluctant to let him go, but Juliet understood. Their son needed to see the world, to make his own way before he settled down. "He will come back," she told Ryder the night before Will left. "This is his home. These are his roots. He just needs to spread his wings a little first." She was right. Will returned a year later, taller and more confident, full of stories about life on the trail. He threw himself into working the ranch with renewed enthusiasm, and Ryder began talking about expanding even further, maybe starting a breeding program for quality horses. Emma married at 20 to a good man named Thomas, who ran the mercantile in Eureka Springs. She and Thomas built a house on the edge of the ranch property, close enough that Juliet could see her daughter often. When Emma had her first child, a little girl named Rose, Juliet held her granddaughter and marveled at the circle of life. Henry surprised everyone by announcing that he wanted to be a teacher. He went away to a college in Little Rock, and when he returned, he started a small school in Eureka Springs, teaching children from all over the area. Juliet was so proud she thought her heart might burst. The turn of the century brought changes to the world. Automobiles began appearing in the cities, electricity was becoming more common, and there was talk of flying machines. But on the ranch, life continued much as it always had. The cattle still needed tending, the horses still needed feeding, and the work never stopped. Ryder's hair had gone completely silver by the time he turned 50, but he was still strong, still capable of a full day's work. Juliet had a few gray strands of her own, and her hands were rougher than they had been in her youth, but she did not mind. Every line on her face, every callus on her palms was a badge of honor, proof of a life well lived. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling the house and yard. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Old Tom Fletcher, now well into his 80s, gave a toast that had everyone wiping away tears. "I have known Ryder since he was a young man, barely more than a boy," Tom said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I saw him build this ranch from nothing, saw him work until his hands bled to make something of himself. And then he found Juliet, and I saw him become complete. These two have built more than just a successful ranch. They have built a legacy of love and hard work and family. They have set an example for all of us about what really matters in this life." Juliet looked around at the gathered crowd, at her children and their families, at the friends who had become as close as family, at the ranch that had been built with sweat and determination. She looked at Ryder beside her, his hand warm in hers, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," she said when it was her turn to speak. "Thank you all for being part of our lives. 25 years ago, I was lost and alone, convinced that I had nothing to live for. And then this man found me in a snowstorm and refused to let me give up. He saved my life, but more than that, he gave me a reason to live it. He gave me love and family and a home. Every day since then has been a gift, and I am grateful for every single one." The party lasted late into the night. When it was finally over and the guests had all gone home, Ryder and Juliet walked out to their favorite spot, a small rise overlooking the ranch. The moon was full, casting silver light over the fields and buildings below. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ryder asked. "The day I found you?" "Sometimes," Juliet admitted. "Usually when it snows. I think about how cold I was, how scared. And then I think about how you appeared like an angel, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known how to pray." "I think about it too," he said. "I think about how close I came to not riding up there that day. If the storm had been a little worse, if I had decided to wait it out at the main ranch, if I had taken a different path, any of those things, and I would have missed you." "But you did not," she said firmly. "You found me, you saved me, and then you loved me. That is what matters." He pulled her close, and they stood there together, looking out over everything they had built. The ranch stretched out before them, acres of land that they had worked and improved. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and inviting. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing, settling down for the night. "I would do it all again," Ryder said softly. "Every hard day, every setback, every challenge. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, as long as it meant ending up here with you." So would I, Juliet said. I would endure that storm 1,000 times if it meant finding my way to you. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the moon rise higher in the sky. And in that moment, Juliet felt completely at peace. She had found her home, her purpose, her love. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her and had come out stronger on the other side. She was no longer the frightened, desperate girl in the wagon. She was Juliet Finch, wife and mother and rancher. She was loved and cherished. She was home. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Tom Fletcher passed away in his sleep one winter night, and Ryder wept at the funeral for the man who had been like a father to him. Will married a sweet girl named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Juliet and Ryder 3 more grandchildren. Henry found love with a widow who had come to Eureka Springs seeking healing from the waters, and they had 2 children of their own. Emma's family grew to include 4 children, all of whom spent as much time at the ranch as they did in town. The ranch continued to thrive. Under Will's management, the horse breeding program became renowned throughout Arkansas and beyond. People came from as far as Oklahoma and Texas to buy Finch ranch horses. The cattle herd remained strong, providing a steady income that allowed the family to weather the economic ups and downs that affected so many others. Ryder and Juliet gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, content to let their children take over. But they still worked, still contributed. Ryder could often be found in the barn, working with the young horses, his touch still sure and gentle despite his age. Juliet kept the vegetable garden, an enormous plot that fed not only their family, but provided produce for Emma's family in town and any neighbors who might need it. On a crisp autumn day in 1912, Juliet turned 55. The family gathered for a celebration, all the children and grandchildren, all the friends and neighbors. It was a joyous occasion, full of love and laughter. But as Juliet watched the sunset that evening, she felt a strange sense of melancholy. "What is wrong?" Ryder asked, coming to sit beside her on the porch. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "Everything is perfect, actually. Maybe that is what worries me. It feels like it is all too perfect to last." "Then we will enjoy it while we have it," Ryder said, taking her hand. "We have been blessed, Juliet. More blessed than most people ever get to be. Whatever comes, we will face it together, just like we always have." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence as she had for so many years. "You are right. Together." True to his word, they faced everything together. When the Great War came, and young men from all over the area went off to fight, they worried together, thanked God together when the armistice was signed. When the influenza epidemic swept through in 1918, they nursed sick grandchildren together, mourned together when one of their ranch hands succumbed. When the hard times of the Depression came, they tightened their belts together, found ways to help neighbors who were struggling, kept the ranch going through sheer determination and careful management. Through it all, their love remained constant. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight and good morning. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper, something that was woven into the very fabric of their lives. In 1935, Ryder fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia that would not break. Dr. Miller's son, who had taken over his father's practice, did everything he could. But Ryder's lungs were weak, damaged by years of dust and smoke. He fought hard, never complained, but Juliet could see him fading. She stayed by his side day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of all the good times they had shared. Will and Henry and Emma came to visit, bringing their children and grandchildren. The house was full of family, full of love, but Juliet could feel her husband slipping away. On a cold January morning, Ryder opened his eyes and looked at Juliet with perfect clarity. "Do you remember," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "when I found you in that snowstorm?" "I remember," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I remember everything. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," he continued. "You still are. Loving you has been the greatest honor of my life." "Please do not leave me," she whispered, even though she knew it was selfish. "I do not know how to do this without you." "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he said. "You will be fine. You will be better than fine. You will keep this family together, keep the ranch going. That is what you do. You survive." He reached up with a shaking hand to touch her face. "I will be waiting for you," he said. "When your time comes, I will be waiting, and we will have forever together." "Forever," she repeated, her voice breaking. He smiled then, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 46 years ago. "I love you, Juliet Finch. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you for all eternity." "I love you too," she said. "So much, so very much." He closed his eyes then, and his breathing slowed. The family gathered around, all of them crying, all of them holding on to each other, and as the sun rose over the mountains, Ryder Finch took his last breath, surrounded by everyone he loved. The grief was overwhelming. Juliet felt like a part of her soul had been ripped away. For days, she moved through the motions of living, accepting condolences, making arrangements, but feeling numb inside. They buried Ryder on the ranch in a spot overlooking the valley, with a simple marker that read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Juliet walked up to the grave alone. She stood there for a long time, feeling the cold wind on her face, remembering. "I do not know how to do this," she said out loud. "I do not know how to live without you." But even as she said it, she heard his voice in her mind. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." And she realized he was right. She had survived so much already. She had survived being abandoned in a snowstorm. She had survived poverty and hardship and the death of her mother. She had survived because she was strong, because she refused to give up. She would survive this too, not because she wanted to, but because she had to, because she had children and grandchildren who needed her, because the ranch needed her, because Ryder had believed in her strength and she would not let him down. So she lived. She kept working the garden, kept managing the ranch finances, kept hosting family dinners. She took joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, delighted in watching them grow and learn. She stayed involved in the community, helping at the church, contributing to local charities, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Will ran the ranch with skill and dedication, making his father proud. Henry's school became one of the best in the region. Emma's mercantile thrived. The Finch name was respected throughout Arkansas, synonymous with hard work, integrity, and family. On her 70th birthday, Juliet's family threw her a party that rivaled the one they had thrown for her and Ryder's anniversary. Looking around at the sea of faces, at the generations that had come from her and Ryder's love, she felt a profound sense of peace. That night, lying in the bed she had once shared with her husband, she thought about her life. She thought about the terrified girl in the wagon, certain she was going to die. She thought about the cowboy who had found her and refused to leave her side. She thought about the years they had spent together, building a life, raising a family, creating something lasting and beautiful. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this life." And in the silence of the night, she could have sworn she heard his voice, warm and full of love, always. Juliet lived for 7 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77. She was buried beside Ryder, in the spot overlooking the valley they both loved. At her funeral, Will spoke about his mother's strength and courage, about how she had survived things that would have broken most people, about how she had never stopped fighting, never stopped loving. "My father saved her life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she saved his too. They saved each other. And in doing so, they built something remarkable. This ranch, this family, this legacy of love and hard work. That is their gift to us, and we will honor them by carrying it forward." The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Will's children worked it, and their children after them. The Finch Ranch became legendary in Arkansas, known for its quality livestock and the integrity of its owners. And always, in the family stories passed down through the years, was the tale of how it all began, with a cowboy who found a girl in a snowstorm and never left her side, and the love story that grew from that frozen moment in time. And so the story that had started with cold and fear and near death became a story of warmth and love and life. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of true love. It became a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when we are certain all is lost, salvation can come from the most unexpected places. Juliet Nash had been left to die in a snowstorm, but Ryder Finch had found her, had saved her, had loved her, and together they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were both gone. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.